Welcome to the VHS Club special edition night. I completely failed, and we actually missed doing a episode recording on Friday the 13th. So everyone put on
Yes.
their imagination hats. We're gonna pretend
It's
that
last
tonight
Friday.
that today is Friday. It's not. It's Tuesday, but people listening later are not gonna know. So let's pretend it's Friday the 13th, and we are here talking about Friday the 13th. Are you ready? Are you ready for this?
I am so ready. And I have to say, I went up to my cottage and I did watch Friday the 13th on Friday the 13th.
All right. So
At
Nat
a
is
secluded
winning.
cabin in the woods. I know, I broke all the rules.
You broke all
by
the
myself.
rules. I was with some of my friends and colleagues running a camp themed event, so I feel like we were both. I was watching the movie,
Quite
but we were
similar.
both in camp mode. So yeah, we are ready to dive in and talk about Friday the 13th. And for anyone that is following along, we're going to do 2 episodes this week. So if you're part of our live studio audience and our live recording space, we're going to do one here on Tuesday, and then our usual time, Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, we're going to dive into Halloween, which is outside our 80s, 90s, and today. but we're gonna do it anyway because it's Halloween time and we have to watch Halloween. So we can do a comparison
Absolutely.
at the end of that one to see which
I mean,
one
there
we like
are
more.
Halloween movies that came out in the 80s. We're just going to cover the first of the franchise.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, these franchises. That's a weird word. Anyway, these series
Franchise?
of
These franchise?
movies, these franchises, No, I don't know.
I don't know. We don't know.
These
What is the
groupings,
plural?
large groupings of movies are pretty like epic and iconic. So it felt appropriate to
And
not force
they-
everyone to watch all of them. You could do that in your own time, but we're going to cover them like as a whole. So as we were talking about Friday the 13th, we will talk also in a little bit about just like Jason movies, slasher movies, everything in the kind of Friday the 13th world. So yeah,
We
I'm
do love our
excited.
buddy Jay.
I'm excited. So question to our live studio audience, since we have a few people hanging out. I see George, Paul, Hank are all here. Have you seen this one? Paul, I think Paul told me earlier today that he had not seen this one, or he had watched it this morning. So Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. Had you seen this one? Is anyone new? Are there any Friday the 13th virgins in the house? Let us know. Let us know if you've never seen it, and now you have. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what this one was like.
Just to throw it out there, this falls in the genre of slasher, which is a subgenre of horror.
Yeah.
Slasher meaning essentially that you die by blade. So,
Yeah.
and traditionally, the blades tend to be machetes, scissors, or chainsaws. Seems to be the most.
What about
common.
axes?
Well, I mean, Voorhees has his machete.
True.
Leatherface has his chainsaw,
Mhm.
Freddy has his claws, but that's a whole other
Yeah, he's got
thing.
knives for hands.
Knives for fingers, and what was the other one? I don't even know what I just said. Machetes,
Scream.
chainsaws. Oh, knives.
Yeah, knives.
Scream.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those tend to be the iconic ones. And there's kind of a set of rules. There's like common things that happen in all of these slasher movies that kind of makes it exciting to watch because you know what you're getting into. Like if there's a slasher, there's a certain set of rules that are always followed, and sometimes the filmmakers will make a little tweak here or there, which will like send any slasher lover like, oh my god, freaking out because they'll like add a little like surprise for us. But in general, there are certain rules to live by if you're in a slasher movie. And I found this list. I was telling Katie, I'm like, I think I wrote a list about like what to do in Friday.
Like I have a list. Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I have a list and I wrote it like 15 plus years, almost 20 years ago. But anyways, so I found this list. So for Friday the 13th, things that you must always do to survive, to be the final girl, is keep calm. Don't go swimming.
Calm. Don't go in the water. We've got it. Okay.
Don't go swimming. Don't have sex, especially at camp.
Yep.
Don't smoke. Don't drink. Don't do drugs.
Yep.
don't go outside.
Stay indoors
I mean,
and play games.
yeah, yeah, because once you go outside, you know you're dead.
Yep.
Also, don't split up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, under any circumstance, like, even in this movie, she's like, oh, Billy, like, thanks for tucking me in front of the nice cozy fire while I know all of our friends are missing. And he's like, cool, I am going to go check the generator that got turned off again mysteriously, even though we know all of our friends are missing and dead.
Yeah.
Split up, you die, Billy. Don't run from the killer.
No.
If he sees you and you start running, you're dead.
Plus, you're never going to be able to run from him. Like, one of my favorite parts of these movies is that you have like the blonde, usually like very scantily clad woman, and she's just like fully running, like breasts to the wind, running full pace, and the killer is just like walking slowly behind her, and he always catches up. No matter how fast she runs.
Because also in slashers, people have a tendency to always run in circles. Don't do that. Don't run in
circles. No, run away.
Also, if you trip, get up and run. Don't wait there for the killer to then sink his machete into you, because that happens a lot in these movies.
Mm-hmm.
And then turn on the stupid light before entering any room.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, I'm like, because every time somebody goes in a room, hello, and it's pitch black, turn the light on. It's next to the door. The switch was right there. You could have seen him waiting with his giant weapon.
Yeah.
No.
Those are good life lessons to live by.
Yeah. I mean,
just like, in general,
obvious.
Obviously. Well, I found this like really, I thought instead of us diving into what this movie is about, I found this incredible article from the Washington Post, which I will absolutely post in the show notes later, but it breaks down all of the Friday the 13th movies and includes how many murders there were in each, what the most epic murder was, but it also includes the little description, like a super brief description for each movie. So I'm going to read this one again. It's from the Washington Post, so that we can just dive into the details, because I know that you want to know what the plot of this movie is. So get ready. Here it is. So 2 counselors at Camp Crystal Lake are murdered in 1958, and the camp is closed. Attempts to reopen the camp fail because of arson and contaminated water. In 1979, another attempt is being made to open the camp, and on Friday the 13th, poor choice of days, just my feedback, the counselors hired to work there are killed off one by one. The killer, Pamela Sue Voorhees, whose 11-year-old son, Jason, has allegedly drowned while swimming at the camp in 1957. Voorhees faults the 2 counselors who she believes were making love instead of supervising the children who were swimming in the lake. The lone survivor of the camp massacres, a woman named Alice, decapitates Mrs. Voorhees with a machete in slow motion. Yes. There you have it. That is the entire movie in like a few short sentences. One of my favorite fun facts before we dive into like all of the epicness of this franchise of movies is that according to a bunch of research we did earlier today, the woman who survives in like all of these movies, there's always like one woman that makes it through, is almost always blonde or dirty blonde, which is like interesting. So Jason just like, he's like, all right. So I would die. You would die. We would both die.
I feel like it's not necessarily a Jason thing, but I feel it's more of a Hollywood thing.
Maybe it's a Hollywood thing, but
I feel like the leading lady tends to be blonde or lighter haired. It's anyways. Yeah, we wouldn't have made it all the way through. And just so everyone is keeping track, actually, let's play a little game. So if you're hanging out with us in the live studio audience, how many murders do you think happened in this movie? Paul's brand new. He said he just watched it for the first time today. So it's fresh. It's fresh in Paul's mind. So how many murders? Take a wild guess, when we'll answer in a little bit after we're done diving a little deeper into this. But it's more and also less than you would think. So, give us some guesses and we'll answer that fun trivia question. Average?
This one is not the least amount of murders and definitely not the most. So yeah, I would say it's probably in there in the average. Yeah, average amount of murders.
At first when I saw the number, I'm like, that's a lot less than I thought it was. But then I was like, wow, that's actually like a significant number of people to see die on screen.
we got some great guesses coming in. We have Hank at 6, George at 8, Paul at 9. We're gonna allow some more time to really consider this. But before we jump too much into some of the just nuances of this film. I think it is interesting that this one is very different actually than all of the other Friday the 13th films
Yes.
that follow it, which is a fact that actually made the screenwriter really upset. Like he really felt like ripped off by the other movies because the other movies, all of the sequels, all of the bajillion sequels that exist in this franchise, Jason is the killer, but he is not the killer in Friday the 13th. And in fact, there is a pretty strong implication throughout the entire movie. And I guess it kind of maybe backtracks it at the end that Jason is dead, that he's like was a child and straight up drowned. So it is interesting that they decided to do the sequels with this, you know, kind of with Jason as the killer, given that what I think made this movie kind of different and interesting in its time is that it doesn't follow a lot of those other kinds of like what would eventually become the slasher rules. Like you don't see the killer throughout like all of it. Yeah, it's the origin story, right? You don't see the killer throughout it.
Without like, but it happens to be the first movie that blossomed this whole franchise that is pretty much still ongoing. But yeah, his mom ends up being the killer. And I'm wondering now, and I just rewatched it today, but did she say that they killed Jason, that he drowned?
She says he drowned.
Did she? Because I know that
now I'm second guessing myself, but I'm pretty sure that she said.
Remember.
I'm pretty sure she said that he drowned. Well, she gives an entire speech at the end where she basically
about how
the counselors were making love and
let him drown, but did he die? Obviously he didn't die. So because I know the villagers say he like a kid drowned.
Yeah. And
I know the police say that a kid drowned. And I'm wondering if she ever actually said it. That would be, I have to go back and look. We'll make a note for Thursday.
We'll be back on Thursday. It reminded me a lot of Psycho. It had that like the same kind of like crazy mother son.
Yeah.
Obviously Psycho was the reverse, where the son was the killer and the mother was in his head, whereas in this one it was the mother as the killer and that kind of the memory of her son was her guiding force. But I did kind of
have a little multiple personality thing going on. Like some kind of personality psychosis.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Because she was at some points talking as if she was him, a child.
Yeah.
Like she was mimicking a child's voice. So I'm like, oh, that's devious. And then we find out later in the movie that it's actually Jason speaking to her, but in her own mind. So that was really interesting.
So do you find it, this was what was in my mind the entire time watching it, because I was thinking about like watching these movies when we were teenagers and like the fun of watching like, you know, movies that have the jump scare in them when you're in like a group of people. It doesn't have the same kind of vibe or feel when you're by yourself as when you're in a group. But I was wondering, like, did this one specifically, was this one scarier or less scary than the others, where you don't see as much of the killer? Like it's not like the other ones where you see like Jason like walking, you know, with the axe or the machete later. Like you see the kill scenes, but you don't see the killer. And there's even a moment in this one where the I forget what his role is, but where he recognizes her. He's like, oh, you know, oh, it's you, like, and is like being friendly and then gets killed. So it's some ways I think it's scarier. Yeah, exactly.
It does have elements of the psychological thriller, like Psycho and Peeping Tom, which are some of like the older.
Yeah,
they're credited to possibly be the origin of slashers, but they're definitely more on the psychological thriller side, whereas this is much more of a physical, we're going to see all the guts side.
Yeah.
So it definitely does, like this movie for sure has a lot of reference to its predecessors.
Yeah.
Like even at the beginning when we see the kids are driving into the camp, the counselors are driving into the camp and they're in their truck and they're listening to something on the radio and it's dueling banjos. Not specifically the dueling banjo song, but it's a banjo song, which is a nod to another movie where shit goes down in the woods and everybody dies, Deliverance, from I think it's 1972. So there's like these little nods in this movie to its predecessors, but so I definitely, I do think it does lend to a little more scariness, because also the legend of Jason we don't see until the very last bit where he jumps out of the water to pull Alice into the lake, and he looks like a monster. You could see he's disfigured, and you could see he looks like a monster. But up until like when we're seeing everybody getting killed, like you see just a normal hand and a plaid shirt and a shoulder. Like you don't see who it is. So, and like as watching the movie for the first time, you're like, well, I really don't know. The killer could be anybody. It could be one of the kids. It
Yeah.
could be Steve, the owner of the camp, who, by the way, like Steve just dicks off for the whole time. These kids come in to work for him, and he's like, we have 1 week before we open, and we still need to put the eaves up on the houses. We need to paint the whole camp. We need to get running electricity because it's only like questionable in some places. So I have an emergency generator. Like, it's like the camp is still in shambles, and he's been working on it for 3 years. They specify in the movie, yeah, this guy's been working on this place for 3 years and sunk all of his inheritance into it. And it's like a week until opening, he has nothing ready. And then
Yeah.
he just pisses off for like 2 days.
Yeah.
Like, where was he? What was he doing? I thought that was wild. I was like, I don't understand why he's not here in this movie. He does show back up in the end to get himself murdered, but I just thought that was hilarious that he just like took off. So
He takes off, and the like, maybe this is just my viewpoint looking back on this from like now, but I'm like, wow, the lack of structure and the kind of like laissez-faire attitude from these like teenagers. Like if I showed up to a job, like even as a camp counselor, like if I showed up to like a summer job and there was like no one there, like they're just like, oh well, like let's just swim and have sex and play strip Monopoly and like make food. Like they're like very casual about the fact that there's no one else there. There's like no real plan for what they're supposed to do. There's like no note anywhere. Like they just like show up for these jobs, and they don't seem to have any structure whatsoever. Yeah. There's just like nothing for them to, they're just like fine with hanging out.
There was that one little moment at the beginning of the movie where Steve sees Alice standing on a ladder. She's putting up one of the eaves on one of the cabins, and he kind of really like, the scene was super uncomfortable because he kind of was hitting on her, and she's like, yeah, no, dude. And she's just really nice about it. And then he leaves that situation thinking he's like the cock of the walk. He's like, yeah, I'm hitting on this like teenage kid
who I hired
like,
to, yeah.
Ew,
exactly.
like you're her boss. What? And like there was no point to that scene really in the long run. I wonder what the original thought was behind that scene. Because I'm like, oh no.
I don't know, maybe we're showing that he's a little bit smarmy.
He was smart. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, all right. Are we there? So how many, I know you probably saw this number, Nat, but how many murders in this movie? Did you see?
12.
There are 12. Paul was the closest without going over, if we're thinking Price is Right rules. So congratulations to Paul. 12 murders in this one. The most amount of murders in any Friday the 13th movie is 22. There are 2 of them that had 22 murders in them. The final Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday in 93. And let me scroll through here. Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning from 1985. Both had 22 murders. So yeah, different, again, like a different vibe. Like less murders, less gratuitous, less, I don't know. They were definitely gratuitous. Like they showed a lot of, blood and guts, but they get crazier as the movies go on. That's for sure.
The first kill. So there's this girl hitchhiking to the camp. She's going to be the cook there for the summer. And she goes through town. She asks like, hey, where the camp is. And she's in this diner, and everybody's like, as soon as she says Camp Crystal Lake, the whole village gets like quiet. And I was like, run, Annie, run. But no, she gets driven almost to the camp, which I don't understand. This guy offers to drive her there and then drops her off at a cemetery near the road that goes to the camp, but not actually to the camp. So she's still marching along. She sees another truck go by, so she decides to hitchhike. So she just gets into this random person's car without saying a word. Not like, hey, are you going this way? Would you mind dropping me off? Nothing. None of the notions of hitchhiking were involved in this. She just hops in the car, and then she realizes too late that like, oh, this is not going to go good. So she jumps out of the moving vehicle. Of course, like busts an ankle or whatever. She's trying to hobble through the woods. And I love the first kill because it was almost slow mode where her throat gets slashed. She's pinned against a tree. Her throat gets slashed. And then the gap just opens slowly and then starts to like, all the blood starts to flow. But I thought that was really well done. I mean, it's a bit hokey. It's not like great special effects or at all realistic, but
for
it's
the
very shocking.
for the time, I mean, the guy
good.
that was responsible for doing all of these special effects like did go on to become like a pretty famous name in the industry. Like it was for the time, it was very, very well done.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah, he was, sorry, his name is, I was trying to pull up his name. His name was Tom Savini. He was one of the first crew members on board for this film because the producers were like obsessed with his makeup and special effects that he did for Dawn of the Dead in 1978. So
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think it's a little bit interesting. So one of the facts that I found while I was taking a look into this movie is that this was definitely an attempt to kind of play off of the popularity of Halloween, which was released 2 years earlier. So we probably should have done them the other way around, but that's okay. We're on Friday the 13th kick right now. So yeah, I do think it's interesting that they were like trying to kind of follow in those footsteps, and yet definitely like a different vibe from this one compared to Halloween. Like in Halloween, you have this and maybe it's just because Jamie Lee Curtis is just like iconic, but you have this cast of teenagers, but none of them are memorable. Like the only one that you remember is Kevin Bacon. It's only because he's famous now. Like
with also like Kevin Bacon in a midriff, like a crop top. I'm like, male midriff tops in the 80s were epic. I'm like, thank you.
Epic. But like I just watched this movie. Like I just finished watching this movie, and I couldn't even tell you any of their names other than Annie, who I think is the main, and I don't even know if that's the main actress. But
she was the first one to die.
Was she?
Annie, Alice, Billy.
Oh, look at you.
Kevin Bacon.
There was a Kevin Bacon. Yeah, but like it is a little bit different like between the two of them. And then again, you have in Halloween, you know, they talk a lot about, you know, kind of the formula for a slasher flick. You have, you know, this group of teenagers. This normally happens in like this tight timeline. It's normally in like a very like specific setting, right? And Camp Crystal Lake, which is still a functioning camp. With like who goes to this camp? But it's anyway. That aside, still a functioning camp, friends. But yeah, it is interesting that Halloween takes place in like a town. Like they're like not out of the way. So it like, I don't know, it's interesting to kind of follow up from that movie, and yet I think they did a pretty good job of really kind of making their own mark. Like in our minds, when we think of slasher movies, we definitely are thinking of, you know, Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers, and Ghostface, I guess, and Texas Chainsaw Leatherface.
Could we just note that I'm like Jay, Mike, like they're my friends because I love you guys. Sorry.
Now we're just like on the sidelines high-fiving them as they walk by, like, yeah, you got this. I'm just gonna wait over here. You go.
Like, we'll pretend my hair's blonde. I live.
Mm-hmm.
I do say like for slashers kind of overall, I feel like with Halloween, with Friday the 13th, even with Texas Chainsaw, which was I think 78, it came out. Was it
something like that, late 70s? Yeah.
And so their key elements are you have a villain that has some sort of childhood drama.
Yep.
Always. You have to have a theme song for the villain. So you know when the villain is going to come onto the screen.
Like Jaws. Think Jaws. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like with Friday the 13th, you know Voorhees, either mother or son, is going to be about like coming to murder somebody when you hear the cha-cha-cha, like it's, you know, so also the acting, it doesn't have to be good. You just need people to die dramatically, and kind of the cheesier and campier it is, the better it is for the audience. And you need over-the-top kills, always.
Yeah.
Like weapons of convenience or weapons of inconvenience, like wood chippers have been used in this franchise, which
Nope.
which again, too much true crime in my life that I know that the way Jason wood chips a couple of people won't work, but
You're like,
it'll
nah.
gum up the machinery. Anyways, gotta freeze them first. But yeah, so there's certain elements like that, and what I love about this franchise too is that we go from something. Okay, so this is a mother avenging her son. The son, his life was ruined because he didn't actually die. So then now he's avenging his mother. Then he eventually, a couple movies in, gets killed, but like for real this time. But then, of course, it's Friday the 13th, and some weird supernatural thing. Like he gets his grave, somebody's trying to rob his grave. And then the iron fence around it gets struck by lightning, which then rejuvenates his body and reanimates him. It's wild. How this franchise takes all these ups and downs and these turns just to keep it going. And
Yeah.
as implausible as it is, it really just keeps the story on plot. You know?
I think the more ridiculous it gets, the more likable it is, because you just like, there's something about again, I think it goes back to the jump scares and the idea of watching this when you're a little bit younger and in a group where it's,
Like a
even
sleepover or
yeah,
a movie
even when you know that they're coming, you're still kind of just like, oh, like I will say that even watching this tonight, like I've seen this movie a ton of times. It's been a while since I've seen this specific one, but definitely I've seen it multiple times. And at the very, very end where she's like in the boat, I was like, it's the end of the movie. I'm like, get my remote control. And then he like pops up and I was like, I was like, oh, right. Totally forgot about that. Like, so there is, I think, something that's just fun about that level of scary where it doesn't feel believable. Like it's believable, but to a point. So it's like for people that are, I think like, I mean, who knows? Maybe it's different for every single person that's watching it. But at least for me, I feel like it's so over the top that it's more of like it's just more of the fun of watching something that scares you versus some of the movies like psychological thrillers where they feel like, any of the serial killer movies, like there's some level of that's like, well, but that can and does happen. Whereas these crazy like mass murderers are not like, they're coming back from the dead. They're impossible to kill. You have to kill them like 4 or 5 times for them to die. Even then, they're not going to die. So like and no matter how fast you run, they're going to catch you. Like there's something that feels a little ridiculous, and maybe that makes it easier to watch and okay to be scared in that it's not real. Like,
and I think that's where the campy acting comes into play too. It's like you it's not serious. It's not realistic. But it still gives you that thrill of watching something horrific.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in one of the Halloween movies, they nuke Mike Myers. Like, literally, they nuke the town.
He's fine.
And
he's still
halfway through the franchise. Yeah. They do get a little crazy. I have to say, at the end of this movie, when she's, like, she beheads her with the soon to be infamous machete in such an iconic it is an iconic final girl moment. Where she's like fighting with Mrs. Voorhees on the sand and she grabs the machete and she just lobs off her head in slow-mo. Fantastic. And then she just sort of like is in complete and total shock. She crawls into a boat and pushes herself out into the lake to float there until daybreak, which I'm like, same Alice, I would totally do the same. I probably also would have like put holes in all the other boats just so I had the only one. But so you see she's drifting in the water and her hand is dangling in the water. And my first thought, because I've now seen this movie an absurd amount of times, I'm like, if her hand was in the water all night, would she not have peed herself? And then Jason comes out. That's what my brain went. I'm like, oh, no, cold water might have pissed herself.
I thought that she's just such a weird character. Like you don't really care much about her. Like, none of them. Like, there's no character where you're like, wow, I really hope that she makes it. Like, you're just sort of like, all right, whatever. Like, they're all gonna die.
She doesn't have that story now.
Yeah.
Like, usually nowadays it's like her boyfriend cheated on her and her friends.
Yeah, she has no backstory. Yeah, you don't know anything about her. Exactly.
Her
She's
parents
just
died when she was younger, and her older brother is incarcerated, and she's all alone.
Yeah.
Whatever.
She has no story. And then it's not until like maybe, 20 minutes before the end of the movie where she like clearly is the only one left alive, and she's going to have to like live or die. Like, will she survive kind of thing. So then you're sort of rooting for her. And she goes from being like the most useless person. Like, there's like a moment where they like walk in where other people are still alive, and she's like, oh, there's an axe on the bed. That's weird. Haha. And then they just leave the axe and she walks away. Like, I was like, maybe you want to pick up that axe. Just maybe you want to have that with you. Like, I don't.
Well, they do pick it up, and she does take it with her, which I was like, in my mind, I'm like, what, in the 80s, they didn't realize about preserving the scene? Like, because it's covered in blood.
The scene is over. I would have had that, like, with me, like, but she doesn't have it with her in the next scene. And then, and then later, in, they find a bloody axe, and they don't know where any of the other people are, and she's like, you take off and do that. I'll wait here. And then she makes some tea. Like, she's just like, I'm going to have some tea. First, she sleeps for a little bit, which I'm like, bold.
Yeah, when Billy tucks her in front of the fire.
Bold move, but okay. And then she's like, no, I'm going to get up and I'm going to have some tea. And I'm like, also weird. And then, when she finally finds out, she has this what is, often an iconic moment in these kinds of movies where she discovers all of the bodies. It's like another body, and then another body. Like, it's like
how
realizing
strong was Mrs. Voorhees, because she tossed a body through the window.
Yeah,
like
she wasn't
tossed
messing around.
A dead 5'11", 6-foot woman through the window.
Yeah.
At her.
I wouldn't have wanted to mess around.
Okay, Mrs. Voorhees.
But then you have this woman after she has her nice cup of tea. She's like, then the body comes through the window, and then she's like shocked or whatever, and they have like all these fight scenes. But then she seems like she might be finally getting into like the spirit where you're like, maybe she'll live. She she gets the rope and she ties the door closed, and you're like, all right, badass move. Like, I like it.
She's barricading herself in.
She's barricading herself in. She takes like way too long to do it, but you're like, okay, I'm into this. But like, I feel like she goes from being like the most useless person known to man in these kinds of scenes to somehow like
extremely useful.
Very super capable. And I'm like, I don't know. But I mean, I guess
she does check some of the Survivor Girl boxes.
Yeah, she's blonde.
So, she's blonde.
Yeah.
She's kind. So at the beginning of the movie, after Steve, the owner, is kind of smarmy towards her, she's like, you know what, I'm really just going to leave because this isn't for me. I'm going back home to California, like across the country. Okay, like I'm going all the way back home. And then he kind of is like, look, I really need your help. Like, you're the one I depend on the most. And she's like, okay. So she's like really nice, and like, she's the nice girl. Okay. So she's blonde. She's the nice girl. She's kind of like the mother hen, like when Steve is still not around. So they're like, oh, and the cook isn't there. They're like, she's like, oh, I'll start cooking things and get things ready for everybody. And oh, let's play a game tonight. And like, she keeps the group together. Mind you, at the same time, none of them noticed that one of the guys has been missing now for several hours. And then Kevin Bacon and his girlfriend go off and have sex in one of the cabins, not realizing that their friend has been missing for several hours, is in the bunk next to them. I'm like, how stoned were you guys that you didn't smell the body? Like, I'm sorry, he's already going into decomp. He's been there for at least 3 hours. Like, how could you not smell him? But anyway, so she does have some of the Survivor Girl qualities, and at first she does rely on people, and she realizes people are missing, but as soon as she realizes something's wrong, she's like, let's call the cops right away. She's like, let's call the authorities instead of, running upstairs. Which is for sure. If you run upstairs in a slasher, you're going to die. You have to run out the front door to live. So.
Yeah, this one is, for being kind of one of the movies that started off kind of the slasher subgenre.
This checklist.
Yeah, there are some things that are missing in this movie that become like iconic in the later movies. So there is definitely no one the characters are less ridiculous than in the future movies. You have none of the kind of running upstairs, or kind of the like the almost like silliness of the killers, where it's like, like you can like throw things at them and they like throw it aside, or they're like, there's none of that here. It's the killer is hidden in the shadows, and you like are seeing things through the killer's perspective, and it's a little bit less obvious.
Oh, it's the Voorhees lens.
Yeah, the Voorhees lens. And Hank says a really good comment here in the live chat. Hank says the sound effects alone when he's about to kill you is legendary. Yeah, it is interesting, the like iconic music of this movie, which is by no means like a traditional soundtrack where it's like, famous songs throughout. It apparently was developed because and hang on, I'm gonna want to read it so I don't mess it up, but this isn't like every one of these, but the soundtrack was basically a take on one of the lines that Mrs. Voorhees says in the movie. Where did it go? So so the guy who created it, Harry Manfredini, who was composing the score for the film, says, quote, "So I got the idea of taking the k from kill and the ma from mummy, but spoke them very harshly, distinctly, and rhythmically into a microphone and ran them through this 70s echo device. And it came up as you hear it today. So every time there was the perspective of the stalker, I put that into the score." So you definitely hear the kill her mummy is coming through in the like all those sounds, which is kind of fun. And then the rest of the music is just very shrieky and screamy, and so it has that kind of like it puts you on it's not relaxing at all, right? It's putting you on edge throughout the movie, which I think was really well done. It's very subtle, like, I don't know, subtle but obvious. It's an interesting, different kind of take from even like modern day horror movies. So it's interesting.
I also have to say that one of the rules that becomes a rule of thumb in all of these movies is if at the beginning of the movie there is a creepy child or crazy senior citizen and they're ranting about how you're all going to die, always listen to them.
Always listen to the crazy person. Like if you're going wherever you're going and a crazy person is like, don't go down there. Like you'd be like, thank you so much, sir. I'm just going to get back in my car now. Yeah. It's, you know what? It's funny. I like even watching this and knowing all of the rules and having seen this movie so many times, I did feel like the beginning of this movie, like notwithstanding the kind of how crazy it gets, the beginning of this movie felt believable. Like if I was to put myself in the position of these teenagers, like who are not from this town, who are coming into work and like they're really just there to like fraternize and have sex with each other and like and make a quick buck doing pretty easy work. Like I don't know. I believe that they would have acted the way that they acted. Like, I believe that they would have split up because they would have been like, focused on each other. I believe that they would have been like, oh, that guy's crazy. I believe that they would have been like, oh, whatever, the smarmy like camp director guy isn't here. Like, eye roll. Like, it felt like everything that they did, nothing in it felt like I was like in other horror or slasher flicks where you're like, why are you doing that? Don't go upstairs. Like, there was like nothing in this movie that felt like something that I wouldn't do. Like I was like, yeah, all right, I believe it.
When Alice and Billy, like mid to end of the movie, realize that everybody's missing.
Yeah.
That's when I'd be like, no, we are not separating under any circumstances, and I should have made the tea before he fell asleep because we need to stay awake through all of this.
I know. Paul's like, she made tea for two. She did. She was like, I'm gonna make the tea. They'll be back. Like it's gonna be fine.
Another classic element in these movies is you cannot rely on any technology like phones or cell phones, like internet. Not that was in this movie, but I'm just saying rule of thumb. And
if there are neighbors, the neighbors are not home. Like there's no one to help you. You're totally isolated.
And you cannot rely on cars or any kind of vehicle to get you out ever, which I have to say this was another survivor goal thing for Alice. She runs to the car, she sees the body, and she's like, you know what? Fuck that. fuck trying to get this car going. She just runs for the boats. She's like,
Yeah.
though she did get a weapon. She went and got a gun, but
She
couldn't get the
did.
bullets.
She did.
So
like
good for her for getting a weapon.
she
But
pulled
in
it together.
slashers, by definition, guns are not going to help you in a slasher.
No, guns won't help you.
No.
You could shoot them 150 times and like hit them in the head the entire time, and the guy would still be like totally fine.
Has
and
to
everything.
be a blade.
Yeah, has to be a
And
blade.
generally a decapitation. She did, so when Mrs. Voorhees, she locks herself into the pantry, Alice, and Mrs. Voorhees breaks in. And it's kind of like the here's Johnny moment from The Shining, where you just see her face poke through. And she ends up hitting her on the head with like a block of wood, which I'm like, if it was me, I would make pulp out of her skull to make sure that she was dead. So Alice did do that thing that you're not supposed to, is assuming that they're dead if their heads are still attached to their body. Always has to be like a decapitation.
I do enjoy that the woman who played Mrs. Voorhees apparently like had no desire to do this movie. She was just like, well, I need some extra money for a new car, so what the hell? and did it anyway. But apparently,
and she's iconic.
I know, she's iconic. She's like I don't know. She has like just the perfect look for this character, because by the time you finally see her, she somehow looks both really motherly but also terrifying. Yeah. So like she's just a really great. But apparently she was a method actor, so she actually had a really strong desire to know way more about the character. And so she actually created she was the one that came up with the entire backstory that built on the killer's hatred of sexual, sexual transgression, as this article puts it. So it is interesting
That's
that like
dark place to go for
it is. It is. And then the other thing I absolutely loved, I'm just like looking through some of these quotes, and we'll post all of these sources later so that you can follow up and read through them because they're interesting. But and let me make sure. So the screenwriter, Victor Miller, is quoted as saying, to be honest, I've never seen any of the sequels, but I have a major problem with all of them because they made Jason the villain, Miller said. I still believe that the best part of my screenplay was the fact that the mother figure was the serial killer, working from a horribly twisted desire to avenge the senseless death of her son, Jason. Jason was dead from the very beginning. He was a victim, not a villain. But I took motherhood and turned it on its head, and I think that was great fun. Mrs. Voorhees was the mother that I always wanted, a mother who would have killed for her kids. And I was just like, interesting.
Yeah, I think most moms would kill for their kids, but
it was just like, it's just interesting to like.
She took it to another level. She killed for decades for people who didn't do it. But
it just must have been so interesting to be like, oh no, I wrote this movie and I'm really proud of it, and then to just kind of watch it spiral off into what it became must have been just a really interesting.
And it's funny because the franchise itself does have standards as well. There's one movie called Jason X that's not actually part of the franchise. It's just like a rogue movie with Voorhees. And I don't remember the background on how that happened, but it's terrible. I think it takes place in like 2045 or something, and it's in space. And like they basically have Jason like on ice, and like all the criminals on ice, and they shove them up into space, and then he gets out because there's a power failure and kills everybody on the space station.
I mean, why not?
Now that I'm saying that sounds great, actually. But no, but apparently,
does it follow the rules? Small space.
It does. No,
it probably does. It's pretty funny.
I'm gonna have to rewatch it. I had seen it when it had come out, and it was terrible. But it's not actually part of the franchise. So it happens. Happened to James Bond franchise too. There's some rogue movies for it, but yeah.
It happens. I'm just scrolling through to see if we missed any.
I have to say, I also love when Katie and I were watching it. She's like, I really like their raincoats. I'm like, yeah, I would love that green raincoat. I'm like, raincoats aren't as nice as they used to be.
I get very distracted by by all of it. Apparently, so fun fact, if you did like this one, and I'm interested, now is a great time if you're hanging out in the studio audience, let us know what you would rate this one, whether or not you liked it. We'd love to hear. But there's apparently a prequel supposed to come out this year, well, early 2024, called Crystal Lake on Peacock, which would be interesting.
So is this the one that takes place in the 50s?
Yeah, I guess it's the OG original story. So
Nothing is going to top. If you guys haven't seen a lot of the movies, some of them get progressively worse slash better. I think even Corey Feldman's in one of them, to be fair.
oh, maybe, yeah.
But our favorite, Katie and I have watched it many a time, is Friday the 13th, 2009. So it came out in 2009. It's fantastic. This is where the movie creators took it to a different place, is that one. Keeping everything the same, but took it to a very different place. And I don't want to spoil it for you guys if you want to watch it, but we'll have to cover that one time because it's wild.
It's wild. It is wild.
Definitely the best of the franchise. Other than the first one. I do love this one.
I do love it. You gotta love the original. If you're looking for the famous mask, which we put in our YouTube thumbnail here, you actually have to wait until the third movie. He doesn't introduce the mask until the third movie. There have been 9 different actors who have played Jason, so it is not the same all the way through, which I think is interesting. We already talked about the blondes. We're just trying to make sure we're not missing anything. Oh, here. All right. So this will be our final fun fact, unless Nat has one she wants to add. But my final fun fact of the night is that, so we talked about 12 kills in this one, if you're joining us late or didn't hear that at the beginning. 12 kills in this movie. But Jason kills 146 in total throughout this franchise. So fun drinking game if anyone's looking for a drinking game.
Oh yeah. If you guys are interested, you could hit us up with an email. My brother and I had made up we used to have horror movie Tuesdays at our house, and we had a drinking game especially for Friday the 13th. We had it hits the whole franchise. So if you are interested, I can dig up the old rules for that somewhere, and I can let you guys know.
You might have to do it over the span of a few weeks, because 146 kills over the
you would watch like one movie a night. It's not it was made for like 20-year-olds to drink. So
oh my goodness.
When Katie asked me what I thought, how many taters I thought for the movie, I'm like, it has male crop tops, load of nipples, creepy slasher music, basically wrote the rules for slashers, and I'm like, and mediocre acting, which is a must for slashers. So for me, I think we all know what the rating is.
All right. Nat went with 5. I'm back and forth, because I think if I'm comparing it against, so we'll see. I am undecided at the moment, because we're going to review Halloween in a couple of days. So Thursday night, if you're hanging out with our studio audience, you'll have to hang out with us on Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, where we'll dive into Halloween. I think as a franchise, this is my favorite of the franchises. I definitely have watched this one a lot more than I have Halloween or the
Nightmare on
Elm Street movies. I don't quite love the Nightmare on Elm Street as much as I kind of like these like just single indestructible killers that are like, there's something about the supernaturalness. I do like
the crossovers though.
I do like the crossovers.
There are Freddy Jason crossovers that
there
are
there are definitely Freddy Jason crossovers that are pretty great.
Jason.
So. Yeah, I just
Buddy Voorhees.
There's something kind of like iconic. So I would say from like a franchise standpoint, this one's certainly my favorite, and I would probably give it 5 potatoes for my franchise overview. Yeah. But I think, and I'm just going off my memory, I think I like Halloween better as like if I'm comparing just the two of them. So I'm not going to rate it all the way yet. But I feel like I'm somewhere between 3 and 5. We'll have to revisit on Thursday. But yeah, I'm very excited. All right, Paul, you got to drop into the comments before we head off what you thought. I know I chatted with you a little bit earlier, so I kind of know. I will say, like, this is not a good movie. Like, if we're
no. I mean, the acting needs to be bad in these kinds of movies. Like, I know it's shit.
Yeah. This is not like a movie that deserves to win Oscars. This is not a good movie, but I think there's something fun about a really campy, scary movie. Yeah. I will tell a really funny story, and then Nat can correct all of my inaccuracies in it, because I don't remember exactly which movie it was, but we were having one of our sleepovers. We had like multiple sleepovers all the time in our group of like 4 or 5 of us, friends when we were teenagers. And we were at a friend's house, and her parents were what we thought not home. And so we were in the basement and we were watching one of them. It might have been one of these ones. It might have been one of the other slasher flicks, but we were like really into it. And there was like kind of like a hush. And we were in that group where it was like, you know, people were like trying to like crack jokes to ease the tension, but still like jumping at the jump scares. And our friend's dad, who was like just enough of a jackass to pull this off.
Bit of a sociopath.
Yeah,
for real.
bit of a sociopath. Put on a mask, and like went outside the basement window while we were watching this movie, and probably waited for like a good
It was Halloween. It was I think it was Halloween 5.
On, I think it was also like on Halloween night. Like it was on like it was a creepy night, and it was a creepy movie, and tapped with a knife, like a machete, on the glass, and then just left. And so scared the ever living everything out of us. And it was
super funny. His daughter was like the biggest scaredy cat ever, and I think we definitely had to wash a sleeping bag, to be fair. I mean, we were like 13. We were young, but it was pretty hot. Scaredy cat. It was very creepy.
It was very
My
creepy.
My response was like, I picked up the phone to dial 911, and I'm like, I'm just calling the cops, and it's like her parents run down like, no, don't do that. It's like, well,
pretty
the wrong kid.
Pretty iconic. It lives in my memory as one of the craziest things. All right, well, Hank is with us. He five knives cutting 5 potatoes, which is absolutely epic. Doc is correct. I'm a fan of Halloween because Michael Myers is Canadian, obviously.
Well, not different Michael Myers.
Different Michael Myers. Lots of different Jasons. So, you know, hey, like there's one for everyone.
How many Voorhees are there?
One for everyone. Well, this was very fun. And I'm excited to dive into Halloween. So hopefully everyone will come back and hang out with us again on Thursday. Huge shout out. Someone mentioned it in the comments, but my friend Luis got me a police line do not cross lanyard, which I'm just proudly wearing as my ridiculous piece of flair for tonight. I'm just going to wear that every day for this whole month because I can. Why not? But yeah, one of my new favorite things in my wardrobe. I'm wearing my ghost sweater. I'm vibing. I'm very in for Halloween this year.
I'm pulling my best 80s. I'm wearing an old 80s rugby shirt. Yeah.
Solid. Well, we are right on the cusp tonight. This one's 1980, but next week we are going into 1978. I'll have to make a new playlist. 70s movies. It's going to be an adventure. But
it's a slasher.
It's a slasher, and it's Jamie Lee Curtis, so it's going to be iconic as always. So I look forward to it. Well, we did it. And if you enjoyed this episode, wherever you're watching or listening, be sure to leave us a review, tell your friends, share the episode, send us all of your feedback. Only positive feedback. We just throw away all of the negative feedback, so don't even bother sending that. And if you want to hang out with us in the live studio audience, it's super fun, and there's only the coolest people that hang out there. So you can always do that we'll go with most Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Sometimes also Tuesdays because it's double feature slasher week. So here we are. So this week, Tuesday and Thursday, but usually Thursdays.
If you need a couple of survival tips, rules to surviving, we did post on Instagram my notes from about 15 years ago on what not to do to get yourself axe murdered.
Absolutely. And you can
check that out on our Instagram.
You can find our Instagram. We're the VHS Club pod because there is the VHS Club on Instagram. They're awesome. You should give them a follow as well. They're a fun follow, but we have to add pod to the end for it to find us. And we'll be back again in just a couple of days for even more Halloween goodness. By the time we get to Halloween, I'm gonna have watched all of my favorite movies, and I'm gonna be so excited by that fact. So yeah, we're looking forward to finishing up with some more scary movies and then jumping into the rest of our endless list of thousands of 80s, 90s, and today movies. I'm excited. Hank, we gotta end on your comment. Hank is one of the coolest kids when he pops in. It's absolutely true. It is so absolutely true. Well, thanks to everyone for hanging out with us, and we will see you in 2 more days, Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern, or wherever you like to listen and watch your podcast. We'll be there. Bye, Nat. Bye, everyone.
Bye.